Bonjour, I am Nicole Boudreau. I am a biologist. I work with the Organic Federation of Canada. The Organic Federation of Canada is responsible for the maintenance, the review, and the interpretation of the Canadian organic standards that are the pillar of the whole Canadian organic industry. The standards describe and prescribe how to produce and process the products labeled and sold as organic in Canada and on the international market. So there are actually 7,500 certified operators in Canada who are applying the organic standards on a daily basis. So we have approximately 6,000 certified producers, 2,000 certified processors, almost 700 certified livestock producers, and 92 aquaculture operators. The verification officers who inspect annually the 7,500 Canadian organic operators verify that every single clause of the standards is applied correctly. It goes without saying that each clause needs to be clear, applicable, and verifiable. What's more, farming practices are evolving. Science now focuses on soil health, sustainability, and biodiversity. Animal welfare has become a major concern for consumers, as well as the use of genetic engineering and the proliferation of synthetic pesticides. It means that organic standards must evolve to incorporate the latest research findings and meet consumer expectations. So a complete review of the Canadian organic standards is done every 5 years. There are many steps. It is a long process. Step one is that all organic stakeholders are invited to submit requests for modifications to the Canadian organic standards. This invitation for the current review has been launched in the summer of 2023. The Organic Federation, who is responsible for managing these petitions, has received 300 petitions, proposals for modifications to the organic standards. Step two, we then create working groups and task forces to make recommendations on the petitions submitted by the industry. Step three, the recommendations from the working groups are presented to the voting members of the Technical Committee on Organic Agriculture. Step four, there is a public consultation where all stakeholders can comment on the proposed modifications to the Canadian Organic Standards. Step five, the Canadian General Standards Board holds the vote. The members of the Technical Committee vote on the proposed modifications. And step six, the 2025 version of the Canadian Organic Standards is published, hopefully in December 2025. Some quick facts. There are 13 task forces and working groups preparing now the recommendations on the 300 proposals submitted by the industry. 130 people participate in these task forces and working groups, and a majority of task forces and working groups meet every second week. There are 36 voting members on the Technical Committee on Organic Agriculture. So you can understand that the review is a rigorous process, and to clarify how it is led, how it is done, I am very pleased to welcome today 4 active participants to this review. So we welcome Janet Wallace from New Brunswick, Joel Atkin from Ontario, Kristen Banwell from British Columbia, and Rochelle Eisen from British Columbia as well. Welcome. So this review, so the Organic Federation of Canada has received 300 petitions. Some of those proposals for modifications have to be analyzed. And for a majority of these petitions, we need technical support. We need to do research to know what would be the impact on the industry if a proposal was applied to the standards. So Janet, I welcome Janet Wallace from New Brunswick. So Janet is the person that is responsible for collecting all the information that is needed by the working group participants to analyze the proposals for modifications and to help the members of the working groups and task forces make the best decisions. Welcome, Janet. Janet, can you explain, you are in New Brunswick, what is your organic background? How have you developed your organic competence?
I've been involved in organic since the mid-1990s as a small-scale grower, but mostly involved in writing, editing, coordinating organic groups. I was a coordinator of the Nova Scotia Organic Growers for years and also worked with Canadian Organic Growers for a number of years as a magazine editor and book editor, and have worked with other prairie organizations writing farm profiles, and most recently in the last 10, 15 years working with Organic Federation of Canada doing the communications for the standards review, and Organic OACC, Organic Agriculture Centre of Canada, doing editing and writing, trying basically to translate information from scientists to make it more easily understood and applicable for farmers. And also I had a small scale organic farm with sheep, goats, and waterfowl. Right now focused on vegetables.
So for the current review, what are the top issues that you have been requested to analyze, to document, to help the working group members make a fair recommendation?
Oh, there's a huge range. And first of all, I want to say that when you mentioned I'm responsible for collecting some of the research, but the vast majority of the information used by working groups is provided by the members themselves, because the task force and working groups are made up of people who are knowledgeable, a lot of farmers, inspectors, and especially producers on those, and they provide a huge amount of their personal experience to the whole process. Um, so yeah, some of the questions have gone from a lot of animal welfare ones for livestock, and some of the crop working group has asked for information on certain new substances that we never even heard of. I think most of it was actually doing research for the livestock working group. They required a lot of research, and our research takes three different forms. In one way, we actually look at standards from across the globe. So looking at other organic standards as well as animal welfare standards. And that way we can assess how our standards compare, which helps us with equivalency because we have trade equivalency with certain partners. And also just to get ideas sometimes, because rather than reinventing the wheel for every single clause, sometimes other organizations have just nailed it in terms of wording or just bring up points that we may have forgotten in our discussions. So we look at that, also do technical research. So looking at the scientific literature about certain questions. And for example, that's what I did for the various new products or new substances, I should say, that were being suggested for the PS permitted substance list. And also for livestock, for example, trying to determine whether there's a dietary advantage to actually providing more roughage in the diets of pigs and chickens. Like that was ideas. And lastly, we do surveys. So for a number of issues, we sent out surveys to organic producers across the country to get a sense of what they felt, but also what their current practices are. And that was quite illuminating, especially with some of the livestock issues, just to find out, yeah, what they're actually doing and why. So we got a lot of good feedback from farmers, and always look forward to that. And we greatly appreciate the feedback of all of the farmers and producers across Canada who filled out our surveys, and we hope that they will continue to do so, because I'm sure for this review we still may have other questions, and we definitely will for other reviews. And the input of farmers and other processors and producers is invaluable.
Thank you, Janet. And what is invaluable is the participation of many organic stakeholders to the livestock working group. The livestock section is the longest section in the standard. Animal welfare is a very sensitive and interesting issue. So we welcome Tristan Banwell, who is an organic producer in British Columbia. Tristan, tell us a little about your background.
Yes, thanks a lot for inviting me. My name is Tristan Bamwell. I, together with my wife Aubin and my family, manage Spray Creek Ranch. We're in northern Statliam territory outside of Lillooet, British Columbia. We're about 4 hours drive northeast of Vancouver, just where we get over onto the dry side of the mountains in a semi-arid climate. And we are a diversified organic livestock operation and a direct marketer of organic meats. So we raise poultry, pigs, sheep, and cattle in pasture-based agroecological systems. And we also operate our own on-farm meat shop. So we've been BC certified organic since 2015. And this is currently my second time participating in the Organic Standard Review. I also have my Bachelor of Science in Natural Resources Conservation from UBC, and I'm involved in a lot of provincial scale organic initiatives through our provincial association, Organic BC.
Wow. So you know well. I think you know more than me about animal welfare. So as you are participating to the working group meetings, what are the crucial, controversial issues that you had to discuss with your peers in the working groups or the task forces meetings that you attended?
Yeah, this is a good one. So there's a lot going on. So I guess first I'll say in the standard review, I'm sitting both last time and this time, last time 5 years ago, and now I'm on the livestock working group, and I've also participated in the task forces for ruminants, swine, and poultry whenever possible. I've had to step back a little bit from those task forces during the growing season, but most of my contributions are in the livestock working group. So I've seen all of the livestock petitions that are going through. I'm kind of looking through our list right now, and we've looked at, we've got about 80 on our list that we're working with actively right now, 80 different petitions. So the first thing I think I want to say about that in terms of important or controversial petitions is that a lot of the petitions that come in are not controversial, right? Our participants in the working group and in the task forces are producers, animal welfare experts from outside organizations, industry association experts, veterinary and livestock feed consultants, as well as people who are involved in inspections and verification of organic certifications. So we have a real breadth of knowledge and people from all different sectors. But when it comes to animal welfare, a lot of times petitions are not very controversial. Someone will ask for improvements or increases to animal welfare, and we'll find a lot of the producers saying, we already do that. Oh, yes, that's no problem. And sometimes something comes through that is universally perceived to weaken the organic standards. So when something comes up and we take a look at it and say, this person's asking for concessions that don't actually take us in the direction of the organic principles that we are adhering to, it's easy to say that we're not going to move forward with that petition. On the other hand, the ones that end up taking a lot of discussion, I'll talk about a couple of different ways how that actually looks. When I look through the list of petitions that we're working on, we're talking about things to do with the rations that ruminants can be fed, with what the conditions are for sows when they're farrowing, when they're going to give birth, and how much space they have and how they can be restrained. We're looking at the use of different physical alterations to livestock and what's allowable, what's standard industry practice, but what should we restrict in organic production, how calves should be treated if they're taken away from their mothers in dairies, outdoor access for poultry, perch space, nest boxes, and all kinds of diversity of different animal welfare topics. Some of them are really complicated, and what typically will happen is we'll see a petition come in that has to do with some particular, I'll use physical alterations as an example. And something came in about about treatments to the beaks of poultry, like removals of the tip of the beak, what's allowed, what's not. As we dig into it as the working group, we'll oftentimes find that this petition is connected to other petitions that we've looked at, or our moderators, our hosts for the group will realize and make some connections. So we'll combine together several different petitions. And as we dive really deeply into those specific areas of the organic standard, we'll see improvements and changes that we should make for clarity, and realize where there may be inconsistencies and things like that. So if I check into, I actually need to look at them because they are so complicated. But if I jump over to, we work in these big spreadsheets in Google Sheets, and we work collaboratively in these spreadsheets. So when I look at these physical alterations petitions that we looked at, we started to group together several different petitions and started to look deeply into this. So the first thing we got was a lot of information from Janet, as was just mentioned. And Janet had already prepared a lot of background document comparing different standards. So we were all able to review that. Then we start to talk about proposed changes to the standard, and all of the expertise in the group starts to come into play. So people talk about how that might impact their form of production, what they've seen in their inspections throughout the country, how these issues may vary from province to province in different bioregions of our country, and just the diversity of scales of production that we see. And I believe in these physical alterations, as it got more complicated and more issues came into question as we reviewed that standard, that's when the team went back and did these surveys. So then we were able to actually get a real cross-cut of how does it look across the country, what types of physical alterations are people currently doing to their livestock, which of these are important, and where would we have an impact if we further restricted some of these procedures, which can be painful to the livestock and have animal welfare implications. And so as I look through here, I can see on this spreadsheet, we had hundreds, we got up to 175, over 170 different comments of going back and forth, adding more information, wordsmithing our changes. And where we finally came out with was to review the whole physical alterations section of the standard, make sure that we were up to date with the latest research, that we were consistent with codes of practice and information from veterinarians, and that we restricted processes that were painful and unnecessary, or ensured that pain medications were used in the appropriate times, but we still allow enough flexibility for producers to make management decisions that they need to in order to sustain their type of production. So I know that was kind of a long-winded way of going through how this looks from the working group perspective, but I hope that is interesting information for the people listening to the webinar.
Tristan, I want to ask a question, and if you could address it on this one, because I looked at what we're getting for the TC form on the alterations, and I almost asked a question: why are not layers addressed? Like meat birds are addressed, but the layers it's silent, and I was just sort of, is there beak trimming allowed, or what's happening with layers?
Yeah, there is in that petition, we did address beak trimming and beak treatment, and we realized that the standard, as it was written, it didn't distinguish between different types of modifications that are made to beaks for laying hens to prevent the birds from aggressively pecking at one another. And one thing that we found in there is that that treatment of the beaks of some sort in laying hens for organic production has become more or less ubiquitous. And the type of treatment that is the most common, by far 99.9%, is an infrared treatment when they're day-old chicks. And just the tip is sort of cauterized by an infrared beam when they're day-old chicks. There's other types of beak trimming, which happen with a hot knife. They're more prone to operator error. They cause more pain and discomfort to the bird, and they can cause permanent nerve damage to the bird. But in terms of treating the beaks so that they don't have such a sharp tip, what they call beak treatment and the blunting of the tip of the beak with this infrared treatment at day one is by far the least invasive and least painful for the bird. So that's preferable. When we talked about we did talk about, can we just eliminate this practice entirely? Why has this become so ubiquitous? And it's because the birds that we have here in North America, they're raised in large flocks for a lot of organic production. They're in large flocks in barns. Some of the year they're prevented from outdoor access because of weather conditions and other reasons. So these birds are prone to outbreaks of pecking one another and injuring one another. And these beak treatments reduce the chance of that occurring. And when we asked, can we eliminate this practice entirely, we found that actually it's some of it is breed choice dependent. And apparently in our reviews in Europe, there are some breeds of birds that are less aggressive in this way of picking each other's feathers and damaging each other. But they're not commercially available in North America at the scale that we need them to be for this type of production. So that's something that we'll see, an issue we'll see continue coming up at future standard reviews. And if we get to a point where other genetics, other breeds of laying hens that are less prone to these behaviors become commercially available in North America, we may be able to remove the option of doing those types of beak treatments from the standard. Hope that answers your question, Rochelle. Thanks.
Yeah.
Also, just to clarify that a lot of the farmers themselves, they're not doing the beak treatment, but they buy day-old chicks. And they just don't really have other options to buy day-old chicks that aren't treated, that don't have to have beak treatment done to them. So that's a huge part of that. The whole industry is based on beak treatment for chicks. So, but again, it's, as Tristan said, it's something that we can see evolving over time, but you can't push it too quickly. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Tristan. Thank you, Janet. Rochelle, you are in British Columbia. You've been involved in many reviews. Can you describe your organic background, Rochelle, without taking too long?
I try not to. Like Janet, I've been engaged since the mid-90s in provincial organic standards and then creeping up onto the national scene. And I don't know how many reviews it's been involved. Like, I don't even want to go back and try to count. Okay. But it is a pleasure to do this work with such a variety, and the expertise that comes forward into the review process is inspirational to all of us at so many levels, because you take that knowledge into the years in between the reviews, and then you can discuss it with people. Being engaged with the review process is one of the highlights of my life, I have to say. Anyways, I've been involved with organic standard review since the mid-90s. I've been an organic inspector since then as well. I've been on the ground for years. My area of focus in terms of inspections at this point is food processors. So I now serve as the chair of the preparation working group and the organic integrity group that ensures that products after harvest are being managed in a compliant fashion. The other area where I'm engaged in the organic standard is in the greenhouse section. I used to run some greenhouses way back in the old times. So it's old knowledge that keeps me at this table. And the greenhouse is a fascinating aspect of organic agriculture because, especially the Canadian organic standards, because we've always been leaders in creative or greenhouse production throughout the country. And that we have a unique organic standard because we allow container production that complies with our soil concepts of soil health and stuff like that. We don't allow hydroponics per se, and we also allow outdoor container production. And there's no other standards that actually have that level of detail in it. Anyways, I'm also responsible for sprout shoots and microgreens, but luckily there were no petitions in that section of the standard this year, this review. So I'm very excited to be here and to be discussing this stuff with you guys.
But as soil health is becoming such a huge topic in organic agriculture, how do you manage soil health in a container? I think there are many discussions. I understand hydroponics is prohibited, and also now, years ago, people would grow cucumber and tomatoes, peppers, but now they grow a lot of other crops now, horticultural crops in containers. How do you deal with soil health and soil volume?
Well, it's quite interesting because in the olden days, people used to sterilize soil. They used to just bake it and then shove it in a pot and hope for the best. And a lot of times they were taking soil partially from a field and maybe adding some perlite and whatever. And then it went to completely peat, perlite and vermiculite type of stuff. And now we don't even have vermiculite to use. So in the organic standard, where it started from, where the container production started from, was from bedding plants, people needing to grow transplants to be able to sustain their field production. So you can't take soil from a field and put it in a pot and it does not perform properly because it compacts. So you don't have enough air in the pot for the roots to take up air, take up water, whatever. So long ago, the expertise on how to produce plants in containers was a skill set that a lot of farmers had to gain to be able to produce transplants, especially because we needed organic transplants to comply with the production's requirements for crop production. Simultaneously, we had this huge greenhouse expertise in the country. And a lot of it came from hydroponics, especially in the Southern Ontario part, Leamington. That's where a lot of the hydroponic production systems are. And then a lot of people there were started saying, well, I should be able to grow organically. And then container size became an issue because how do you grow a huge tomato crop that used to grow for 18 months? What size volume of soil could you, 18 months in a pot. How do you get enough volume? And so there was people who were experimenting all along, even though nobody was talking about it. They were using, 80, what was it? 80 liters per metric squared. That was a volume that people were starting with. Some people had 100 liters per metric square.
And Quebec, it was a requirement. Yeah.
That was where we first started. So again, just like Tristan said, the expertise is within the people who step up onto the task force, and people start talking and they go, well, I've been experimenting with 100 liters per meter squared, and I've been getting these types of yields. And so and we look around the room and we go, well, is everybody comfortable with that? Because the person's saying, yeah, these are my yields and it's reasonable. There's things I made mistakes with and blah, blah, blah. And that becomes the starting basis for the volume for container size. It's just discussion. There was no science at that point, but it was industry-driven science. So then what happens? So then, of course, we leave the standard loose enough where we say, we're going to review this in 5 years. So it's not written in stone. We need to gain knowledge. And amazingly enough, within 5 years, so many growers started experimenting with their volume sizes because they could always experiment. They don't have, there's always going to be that. And then there's going to be the experiments. And some people, a lot of people came back and said, you know what, the 100's way too much. 80's good. But at 60, when I mix my soils correctly from the get-go, I can actually have excellent production. Now, part of that is that's the volume, but how about quality? So it's finding the right elements to mix into these container soils. And one of the key new elements that the task force in 2020 for the 2025 review wants to introduce is they want container soil producers to sustain their container soils for at least 3 consecutive years. This is changing. This is ground changing. This has never existed. We've always allowed container producers to do whatever they want with their soil as long as they recycled it, reused it somewhere else on the farm, or gave it to another farmer, that type of thing. We never said you can't change out your soil every year. Now, the reality is it's very expensive to change over these soil volumes. And one of the things that has always been in the standard is you need to top dress with compost, and you need to sustain your soil, because just starting off that soil volume at 60 liters won't sustain 18 months. So you have to top dress with good compost, and you'll probably also have to use some fertilizers in that, but hopefully you're putting them in through the compost system. anyways, so this new concept is, you know what? Most growers don't change out their soils annually. It's too expensive. So they need so now the standard saying you should try to keep those for 3 years. That soil should be in place for a minimum of 3 years. Whew, this is going to be so interesting to see how people can comply with this new requirement. And this is part of this sustainability element that the greenhouse container operators wanted to bring into the standard to tie the greenhouse standards more to the in-ground production systems where the soil is sustainable.
And also you can develop microbial life because when you have a turnover. But under this review, Rochelle, you didn't have again to deal with artificial lighting. That was a huge issue in the 2020 review. For as of now, it's not back to the discussion table.
Yeah, it did come back. Artificial lighting has always been such an it was just an error. I think we should always have allowed it for crops longer than 30 days. But heck, here we are. It's not permitted except for growing bedding plants or transplants at the on-farm type of thing. Did we make any real changes to it? Oh, we did make a change. So one of the arguments that's always been there is it's not fair for northern producers because they have such short growing seasons. So in the proposal, what's coming to the technical committee in November, is that yeah, growers in northern climates that don't have daylight can grow under artificial lights. So that is a huge deviation, and I'm very proud that we've actually made that move.
And it's about sustainability. People have to feed themselves.
Yep, exactly.
But artificial lights are permitted. It's just that you have to also have natural lighting as well. So it's
okay. I should have said it a different way. You're right, Janet. I should say 100% production under 100% artificial light is prohibited. But yes, you can always supplement natural light with artificial lighting. Yes, yes. Thank you.
It is a challenge. It is a challenge. Joel, you work with a certification body. What is your organic background?
Yeah, hi. So yeah, I've been working in organic certification since 2010 after I graduated from the University of Guelph here with a science undergrad, agriculture science. And even before I graduated, I started with a research project doing observing organic research and carrying out collecting samples and managing those samples on a bunch of organic dairy farms here in Ontario. And I really enjoyed the interactions that I had with the producers and the conversations that people were having during those opportunities that I had to meet with them. So I was interested upon graduating to find some kind of work in the organic sector. And I was fortunate enough to get hired on to a position to be an organic inspector. And that was 2010. And I've been inspecting ever since. And I've inspected pretty much every type of organic production that there is in Canada, in pretty much every province as well at this point. And yeah, so this is my second review that I've been participating in. I sat on the livestock working group last time and this time as well, and now also the fairness working group. Yeah, and now
Yeah, so as you are an inspector, how can a principle become a clear practice? How do you draft a clear standard? What is a good clause under a CB certification body perspective?
Yeah, I think that's really the perspective that I bring into a lot of these conversations is seeing the research that Janet presented and that we've talked about, seeing the initial proposals from some of the operators and the expertise that comes in, and then just trying to be very careful with how we word precision in the language around what is it that we are really asking for in the standard. Are we asking for practices? Are we asking for documentation of those practices? In what way are we asking for those kinds of things, in order so that it can be interpreted by producers easily? I think that's a lot of non-compliances that we detect as inspectors sometimes are confusion, where the inspector or the client that doesn't necessarily understand what the intent of the standard is. And so the more clearly we can write those phrases to make it very obvious and very, very readable, and applicable to their operations, the less likely those kinds of circumstances will come up. So yeah, we want to understand how can the client demonstrate compliance with that clause. What are we asking of them by putting it in there? And yeah, trying to balance direct design, like what outcomes are we looking for versus what's kind of a hard mandatory minimum.
That is very verifiable. Being myself involved in drafting clauses, you have to make the difference between what you can, what you may, what you should, what you could, what you shall. You know, the standards has no, preferably no conditional. So, but when there are changes to the standards, how are the certification bodies involved in informing their client about on the changes to the standards?
Yeah, so the certification bodies are definitely working with the different provincial organizations as well across Canada and around communicating to the sector that already exists, starting early on in the process. Hey, it's open for proposals to changes. If there's something that has come up, maybe even with a particular client that we know there's been a disagreement between maybe one interpretation of the standard and the client's interpretation of the standard, we might kind of remind them that they have the opportunity to submit a proposed change, and that comes up only once every 5 years. And so that communication starts early there. And then again, when we get to public comment period, that will go out to the operations to say, hey, now is your opportunity to go take a look and to provide that feedback. And then once they do get published, yeah, we'll go through them and review them and create kind of summaries and either send those out directly to operators that are impacted by those specific types of production and those categories. And then as well as just doing things like this, webinars, where a staff person might be able to present and say, okay, here's where things were at with the 2020 standard. Here's the big changes. Here's where things line up for 2025. These are the implementation periods. These are the things you need to know about to try and help with those producers in that transition period and in that implementation phase.
Janet, as Joel is mentioning, CBs will deliver some great information to the producers, to the operators when there are changes. But as you are used to write standards and you are a good reviewer of the standards, how do you introduce a change so that it will maintain motivations? Because when you have a production system on your farm or in your processing plant, well, if you have a drastic change to make, would you lose modification? Janet, please, how are the standard reviewers dealing with changes in the standards that could impact producers and processors?
Yeah, we certainly don't want established organic producers to suddenly have to lose their certification because we're asking them to do too much too fast. So we're always keeping that in mind. But one of the things that we do is, as Joel is mentioning, the communications. So like this webinar, I've been writing articles for Organic Federation of Canada that then get distributed by provincial organizations across the country. And so we tell people right now, these are the changes that might be coming. So just to let people know. So in addition to the communication, operators have a year to implement the new standard. So that goes between, this new standard will be published in December 2025 and doesn't come into full effect until the following, a year after, so December 2026. But there are sections though that we grandfather. So for example, if we're asking livestock producers to do something that involves major changes to a barn, you can't expect them to do that within a year. Some of these are very expensive barns. They simply don't have the capital to keep doing this, especially they can't do it every 5 years. So in cases like that, we'll grandfather a clause and say that as of any new barns need to have it done to the new standard, but existing barns have, say, 5 or 10 years to actually to come into to get it retrofitted to fulfill to meet the new standards. So we could do that. So that happens in a few places, or as Rochelle was mentioning, for the soil volume or the soil recycling, I guess you would call it, having to maintain the same soil, that is actually, there's a 3-year grandfathering clause for that. So because we want to keep improving the standards, but we also have to be realistic, and that farmers can only can't switch on a dime, you know.
Yeah. Tristan, livestock again, the longest section of the standard. How you have participated to many task forces and livestock working group meetings. How do you achieve consensus? Do you vote? Do you discuss? You do surveys? How can you get to the point where everybody would agree on a modification or to refuse a modification?
Mm-hmm. So I would say that the majority of the time we can build a consensus without too much difficulty. Sometimes there's a lot of effort that has to go into the specific details, and but most of the time, if I have an idea of how maybe this clause should be worded, but then I hear from a colleague across the country about their specific challenges, I understand the different perspectives that are being brought to the table. So we're all here to move the standard in a positive direction. We all know that this is based under the organic principles, and that we're all striving to make the standard take us toward. So I think that helps. But there are times when we're going to have issues that we don't agree with, and sometimes it has to do with, maybe something that moves us toward the principle of ecology for even those animals that are raised in larger operations, but it might increase the cost or the bottom line, or make things more challenging for some producers. So we may not be able to reach a 100% consensus. And in those cases, we'll work and work and work on it. We'll revisit it. We'll table it. We'll come to it at another meeting with more information, more suggestions. And then finally, when we have something that seems like most people agree with where we're going with it, then we'll take a vote. And ultimately, what the working group is handing back up to the technical committee, this is the best that we've come up with. And then we include that information as context for the technical committee to look at. If we're passing on, it's in our rationale, we may say, this is the final wording, this is where we think it should belong in the standard, and we achieved this with a 6 out of 10 vote of the members that were present at that meeting. So that goes along to the technical committee, and they're going to review it and decide whether that meets their threshold for a change.
Thank you. It is quite a challenge, but also, Joel, how do the standards are coping with new tendencies, with new, like, for example, we know that now some producers are feeding their livestock with insects. There was also an objective to integrate fairness principles in the Canadian Organic Standards. When you have new practices, new principles that you want to develop, how do you make it?
Yeah, so I think we start really by trying to not build from scratch. We're building within a context. So specifically with the insect section this year, we have livestock standards already. We have organic principles. We have a lot of information already in the Canadian standard, and there's international standards as well. So we do that research, we reference out, so we start to pull together, okay, what are the components of the livestock section that we can still apply, even though it's insects, that where we know we can't apply everything of the livestock section, that we need, that there are some
such as outdoor access for insects. For sure.
Yeah, and so we can review the international documentation that's there. We can review what's already here, and we just start working from there. And then, like we said earlier, like the expertise of the members of the working group comes out, and the intricacies of where do we need to then push things in certain directions here or there show up, and that's when we start to get into the custom built Canadian standard that we're looking for in the end. So
and the fairness, you work in the fairness task force, George?
Yeah, so the fairness one has been a struggle. It's like the principles of organic, it's right there. We've had it published as a reference since the very beginning, as far as I know. And the detail, but how to make it regulatorily binding has always kind of escaped us as the standard. And part of it is the context within which the organic standard and the certification of the organic standard exist. There's a regulatory framework that we exist in. There's also a lot of other standards out there. There's fair trade standards that go into an incredible amount of depth about exactly that. And it's difficult to audit too. If we added a full scope fairness requirement into the standard, it would add a tremendous amount of cost.
Such as interviewing employees, the staff, checking hiring
Exactly.
rules.
Yeah. Like right now, the livestock standards are the longest section of the standard, and it's more expensive to certify livestock operations than it is crop operations, because there's more points there that the auditor has to go through.
Animal health.
So if we did something similar to that around fairness, now you're applying that to every operation, that would be huge. So we tried, we thought, what is there a very focused thing that we could do here or there? We experimented with options, and then we got the survey out, and we got some feedback from the survey, and we heard that feedback loud and clear, and we redirect and see where do we go next.
Yeah, it's not that producers were opposing fairness, but they were thinking that it would not be the Canadian agricultural standards that would be the best recipient for fairness, maybe. Yeah. But organic producers are committed. Rochelle, we've done a survey about alternating between organic and non-organic. There is a clause in the standard stating that you cannot alternate between organic and non-organic production systems. It comes from the past, I believe, from a huge involvement, commitment to organics. And but there was a petition to reassess if alternating was too tough, too severe. What can you say about that?
Yeah, you know what, sometimes when we write the standards, we're looking right around ourselves, and we write a standard to protect our production system. And we don't think far enough in advance. We can't project far enough in advance. So the alternating came out of British Columbia, out of the tree fruit sector. And it's because our closest neighbors were able to leave certification, clean up their orchards, put in a treated post, and then they were able to transition back. And that just didn't feel equitable. So therefore, we decided that we didn't want to do that in Canada, and therefore we're stuck with this alternating prohibition. So fortunately, in this review, there has been some compromise suggested to allow for alternating under certain circumstances. Unfortunately, I can't speak to that to the circumstances, because I think that's going to be the difficult element to ascertain. And I think there's still a weakness in the draft because it just says circumstances. But I do believe there are some, like, so one that was very clear in what I saw in the proposed draft, it's when you're not generating income. So you're taking a year off. Well, for whatever reason that is, that's going to be interesting, because the requirement, even if you alternate out, you are going to have to recomplete your transition. So I think there's some room there, because to me, let's say there's illness in the family and we just decide not to produce crops for this year. As long as I maintain my organic integrity, I'm not sure why I have to complete 3 years of transition again if I still submit paperwork to a certifier, or I'm willing to pay for that membership or whatever. So I'm just saying, I'm not sure what we have is perfect yet, but there's a reasonableness. I feel that the working group did an incredible job sifting through all the absolute no's and all the absolute yeses, because other systems do allow operations to alternate out, do whatever they want, they don't care, and then just transition back. And we're trying to be sensitive to people's production systems. Like, we've had tough weather. Climate change has impacted so many producers. Like, everybody's heads are reeling with all the changes that are happening on their operations. And some people might just need to take a break and do a reassessment of where they're going in their lives. And I think there's ways that we can help those producers sustain their certification, even if they're not marketing a product. But hopefully we'll get there through the technical committee review, and you can hear what my comment's already going to be. I think we should be even more sensitive and more allowing, and somehow have something that'll work better for everybody, so they don't actually have to do 36 months of transition again. That seems a little excessive. Anyways, I don't know if that's what you wanted to hear, Nicole, but that's where I went.
You can speak your mind. And talking of which, I thank the participants to this interview, Janet, Rochelle, Joel, and Tristan. The review process is moving on, is on the way. As you can see, we have dedicated people taking care of standards. Any organic stakeholder, consumer, will have the opportunity to issue their comments when we will open a public consultation in April 2025. We expect to launch a public consultation in 2025, where anybody will see what are the proposed changes to the standards, and will have the capacity to issue comments, and all the comments will be transferred to the working groups. So thank you again for the participants to the interview today. And thank you also to all the auditors for your interest in organic production systems. Thank you.